but I don't think we were able to get him earlier.
He's completely unavailable for the next 2
I can't
weeks.
speak for him, but I can speak for myself, and I tried hard.
I would like the minister to try hard to explain this decision and why he's upending communities and destroying jobs in Quebec.
Well, let's not prejudge. Let's not prejudge the committee's
I've just listened to the testimony, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Bienvenue.
So welcome to committee members, and welcome as well to our witnesses who are joining us online for the first panel. And once again, for the benefit of the witnesses who are maybe unfamiliar with the procedures that we've put in place here at the House of Commons to prevent acoustic incidents. So if you don't have the floor, witnesses, please turn off your microphone and be careful. Well, no, you don't have a microphone like I do before me. But we need to be careful to avoid acoustic incidents. So if you don't have the floor, please turn off your microphone. And please ensure that your microphone is about at your nose level. And that's about it. So, hello, welcome, Madame Fortier. So we will begin. For the first panel, we have with us Alliance Forêt Boréale, Mr. Yannick Baillargeon, President. From Granulco, we have Mr. Bastien Deschênes and Mr. Carl Gauthier. And from the Council of the Innu First Nation of Essipit, we have the pleasure of welcoming Chief Martin Dufour and Mr. Michael Ross, Director of Development and Territory. So, as you know, each group of witnesses has 5 minutes for their opening remarks. We will begin. I'll go based on the list in front of me. We'll begin with Yannick Baillargeon. 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee for having us today. Members of the committee, my name is Yannick Baillargeon. I'm Reeve, and I'm here today as president of Alliance Forêt Boréale, a political organization made up of elected municipal officials from the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, Haute-Côte-Nord, and Manicouagan regional municipalities. Our territory is made up of 65 municipalities, and 34 depend on the forestry sector. The forest is therefore an important source of economy, employment, and vitality for these municipalities. Without the forestry sector, the future of our municipalities is seriously compromised, since it is the largest employer in our territory and generates over $1 billion in payroll. Our organization advocates sustainable development, and to this end, I would like to say that we are calling for measures to protect the woodland caribou to be determined in consultation with local stakeholders to find win-win solutions. In 2024, Quebec's chief forester estimated that the Pimocan provisional zone was nearly 800,000 cubic meters of wood and Charlevoix 357,000 cubic meters. Several forestry operations happen in these areas. There is forestry work, and the whole forestry sector is linked and interwoven like a chain. As soon as one link is cut, the chain breaks. More than 1.1 million cubic meters will be removed from forestry if the order is applied as it stands. Such a reduction jeopardizes not only the future of our forest communities, but that of our entire regional territory. Alliance Forêt Boréale is very concerned about the socio-economic impacts that will be generated by the application of the order by the Government of Canada. It is estimated that 100,000 cubic meters of wood create some 325 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. Based on the results of Quebec's chief forestry officer, job losses are estimated at nearly 2,500 in the Pimocan territory alone, which would be catastrophic. Charlevoix would be an additional 1,160 workers. Mr. Chair, we wonder how the Government of Canada can justify such impacts on Quebec forest workers, families, and communities. Environment and Climate Change Canada only considers the cubic meters lost per mill. Yet the order will also have indirect impacts on forestry contractors and subcontractors, and induced impacts on businesses and other services in our communities. This is not to mention the social impact of job losses. Mr. Chair, once again, we wonder how the Government of Canada can make the decision to implement such an order without considering the indirect, induced, and above all social impacts for forest communities. The Government of Canada must consider that in the Pipmwakan Provisional Zone there are over 700 cottagers, 3 ZECs, 6 outfitters, thousands of kilometers of multi-use roads, tens of kilometers of off-road vehicle trails, and 11 trapping camps. This is very significant economic and social activity. Mr. Chair, by maintaining these uses in the sector, how can the government claim to be able to achieve a disturbance rate of 35% by prohibiting forestry activities when the sector is currently more than 80% disturbed? Alliance Forêt Boréale also noted that the Government of Canada had reached an agreement with Saskatchewan authorizing a 60% disturbance rate in the northern part of the woodland caribous range. The essential condition for signing such an agreement is to demonstrate scientifically that the application of this rate of disturbance does not jeopardize the future and survival of this species. In other words, if this agreement were concluded, it's because the species' survival with a 60% disturbance rate was demonstrated. Mr. Chair, why not apply a disturbance rate for Quebec that takes into account the territory's forest productivity, as is the case for Saskatchewan? We believe that imposing protection measures by emergency order is unacceptable, given that Quebec is working on a comprehensive vision of protection. We demand a balance between protecting the species and preserving forest communities. Our organization believes that it is possible to reconcile forest management and caribou protection, and that the Government of Quebec has the jurisdiction and credibility to achieve this. Alliance Forêt Boréale urges the federal government to refrain from adopting this order, which would have disastrous consequences, to refrain from interfering in the Quebec government's areas of jurisdiction, and to respect the processes underway. Alliance Forêt Boréale is certain that the imposition of this order will have catastrophic impacts on the economy and workers of our forest communities. More than 3,600 families will be directly affected by this measure that the Canadian government wants to implement. How can it not consider the social and economic consequences of this order? Mr. Chair, is the Government of Canada prepared to throw 3,600 families out on the street, 2,500 of them in the Haute-Côte-Nord alone, to kill the regional economy of our territory and to create ghost towns that will live at the government's expense? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Baillargeon. We will continue now with Mr. Deschênes of Granulco Inc. Mr. Deschênes, you have 5 minutes. Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, as representatives of Granulco, we wish to express our deep concern regarding the Liberal government's intention to adopt an emergency order for the protection of woodland caribou. This initiative, which began last June, has raised serious concerns among our workers and fellow citizens. Such an order would have irreversible consequences for our community. Granulco, founded in 2009, is part of the Boissaco Group. Like all companies affiliated with the Boissaco Group, Granulco is organized according to a unique collective and cooperative model in which workers share in the ownership of the group. We're talking about nearly 1,400 workers and people, mostly from the region. Granulco was born of Boissaco's desire to diversify its activities and add value to residual materials from wood, thus creating new products. Its shareholders are the Esipit Uni First Nation Council, 2 investment companies, Intrafor and Investra, made up of local citizens, 2 workers' cooperatives, COFAR and Uniseco, a management company, Groupe Boissaco. Our company is located in the Sacré-Cœur Industrial Complex, home to Boissaco, Ripco, and Sacopan. We specialize in the manufacturing and marketing of energy-efficient wood pellets, which have received some of the most demanding certifications in the world. Our pellets are produced mainly from byproducts generated by the various companies in the Boissaco Group, all of which have internationally recognized forestry certification. Our company generates 30 direct jobs associated with plant operations and various transportation activities. We're talking about 30 full-time, well-paid jobs supporting 30 families and 100 or so local residents. Granilco supplies certified pellets for the residential heating market, mainly in Quebec, as well as equestrian bedding for the U.S. market. We are very proud to have recently developed the bulk pellet market for export. Our bulk pellets are used to replace coal power in the French West Indies. In this way, Granilco contributes directly to reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. It is important to note that Granilco is contractually committed to delivering specific volumes over several years. As part of this commitment, Granilco had to carry out an $18.5 million modernization project, which was completed in December 2023. Thanks to this project, the Boisseco Group's industrial complex in Sacré-Cœur is now able to use all of the byproducts from Boisseco's sawmill, so shavings, sawdust, shavings, and bark. This complex, the only one of its kind in Quebec, enables the group to add value to the entire resource available to satisfy its Canadian and global customers. The end of Boisseco's operations invariably implies the end of Granilco's operations, as it would be impossible to find other sources of supply nearby to replace the volume lost. It is important to realize that if Mr. Guilbeault's order goes ahead, it's not just Boisseco that would suffer the consequences, but all the companies in the industrial complex supplied with raw material by the Boisseco sawmill, including Granilco. The adoption of this order would wipe out all of the efforts made to build this company and the jobs associated with it. The government has a duty and a responsibility to consider all of the facts and issues in this matter. It is inconceivable that we would sacrifice our workers, our families, my family, and our communities. We all depend on the forest to earn a decent living and support our families, and have done so for many generations. In closing, you must understand that no financial compensation can replace maintaining the socio-economic vitality of a region like the one we live in, the Haute-Côte-Nord. We would like to thank you for giving us the privilege of presenting our reality to you. This is our reality. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes. Now we go to Mr. Martin, Chief Martin Dufour. You have the floor. Martin Dufour. I am the chief of the Inuit Nation. I will talk to you about our ancestral land, the Nitassinan Vesipit, which stretches from the Saguenay River to the Portneuf River. We are along Lac Poulin de Couvrel. Since 2003, we have imposed a moratorium on our community to stop the hunt of woodland caribou on our ancestral territory. In 2000, we took steps to create the Akumunan Biodiversity Reserve, a haven. 20 years later, in 2020, the reserve was created, and we are co-managers of it. Our community has been in comprehensive land negotiations for the last 45 years with the two levels of government. Now I'll talk about the facts. In 2016, Quebec published its action plan for the management of woodland caribou habitat, which was to culminate in a strategy. In 2019, the same government announced the start of Indigenous consultations for 2021, promising the publication of a strategy in 2022. The strategy is still being awaited 2 years later, as are the Indigenous consultations, which has forced us to turn to the courts. I want to be clear. The gains we've obtained through negotiation, well, other nations have turned to the courts to obtain the rights. So this is a battle that has gone on for a long time. On June 21st, We obtained a favorable ruling from the Superior Court, and Quebec has until September 30th to respond. Now, the federal order. Currently, 3.7% of the order is on our Nitassinan, our ancestral land, very little. Often we are asked, why did ECIPIT support the adoption of an order? It's not complicated. With everything I've told you, you'll see it's been 8 years that we've been waiting for a strategy for the caribou. And so it was to get the government of Quebec to react. That was the main goal. And all that I've just said, no action was taken against the industry. As was said earlier, we are partners in Granulco with Waseco. We also have BMR, a hardware store. So you will understand that if nobody prepares the materials, we won't be able to sell them. So we are not against the industry, not at all. Our intention at ECIPIT has always been to strike a balance between protection, jobs, and development. It's unfortunate because in the last few weeks, it's a message that we wanted to hammer home, but that never got out in the media.
Finalement.
Lastly, I respectfully call on the Quebec government to sit down with us and the federal government to figure out solutions that will protect our caribou while also protecting jobs. I firmly believe that by working together, we can find solutions that will work for everyone.
Merci de votre...
Thank you for your time. Thank you, Chief. We will now move over to Mr. Martel, who will ask the first question. Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for agreeing to come before us today. I have a question for Mr. Baillargeon. Some groups out there are saying that the impact on potential forestry is only 4% and that the forestry sector is complaining for no reason. What do you have to say about this? Well, firstly, we entirely disagree with that position. Sure, 4% for Quebec as a whole, but in our region, it would represent, in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, 7.7%. And for the North Shore, it's an even higher figure, 12.3%. So it's not the same as the 4%, which is the province-wide figure. The effects will be felt more strongly in the La Haute-Côte-Nord and Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. In La Haute-Saint-Nord, roughly 60% of potential forestry will be wiped out in the next few years. Mr. Baillargeon, with forest fires and with the measures that were already put in place to protect woodland caribou, things are difficult. Do you think that the mills who will be impacted will be able to get supply from neighboring areas? So that's a little bit of a naive idea, because there will be a number of different impacts. First, we would need to find transportation to get wood to our mills. Then we would need to consider the environmental impact. By spreading the losses around the different mills, we would be making everyone less competitive and worse off. So it's just not practical to reorient like that and spread out the impact among other mills. Do you believe that the forestry sector can do more with less wood while also reinventing the way it operates? Is that seriously possible? It would be extremely difficult to carry out secondary and tertiary processing without the primary processing being secured. Our supply chains are important to our entire sector. You cannot remove elements of the chain. Of course, silviculture and forestry productivity can be considered, so we can grow more wood on less land. That is a possibility. Thank you, Mr. Baillargeon. You mentioned you were also a regional mayor. I have a question about that. Do you believe that the forestry sector is doing enough to, or rather that forestry regions are doing enough to diversify their economy? What have been the results of these measures? In forestry regions like our own, we have 65 municipalities that we represent. 35 of those rely entirely on the forestry industry or depend largely upon it. When I talk about forestry, I'm also referring to accessibility and access of the tourism sector to forests. Without the forestry sector, it will be very difficult to access our territory and carry out tourism activities. There's a lot of lovely resorts and cottages in our region, but often the roads to these areas are maintained by the forestry industry. Without a forestry sector, we wouldn't be able to maintain safe roadways. What is more, if we are to protect our forests, we need to have access to them. We need roads that to be built and maintained, and for that we need a forestry industry. Thank you. Mr. Deschênes, you mentioned that the government has the duty to take everything into account. And this leads me into my question. In your view, has the government taken everything into account? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We've been calling for this for weeks and months. In fact, ever since the order was announced in June, we have been focusing on protection because we believe in protecting the caribou, but everyone has been neglecting the socioeconomic side of things. That is why we've come before this committee. Sustainable development means society, it means environment, it means everything needs to be balanced. Building on what Chief Dufour said, we as Canadians, as Quebecers, are able to sit around a table and come to well thought out and develop well thought out solutions that would protect jobs and caribou. But you can't accomplish this by issuing an order from on high. We need to start from scratch and change how we do things. Quebec has taken action. Sure, we hear that Quebec has done nothing at all and has been dragging its feet. But measures have been put in place, numerous measures. The situation has changed. I don't have a lot of time left, only 30 seconds. 30 seconds isn't a lot of time to use, so I'm going to yield them. All right, we'll move over to Ms. Fortier. Ms. Fortier, welcome to the committee. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to the committee today. I have found your opening remarks very interesting. Thank you for sharing them with us. Mr. Baillargeon, do you observe a certain urgency with the need to protect the caribou and their environment? Noting, of course, that you care about the environment as well, the economy as well, as we all do, but do you also believe there's an environmental emergency? We're not just about protecting the economy, we're about protecting sustainable development. As for caribou, we have frequent conversations about the current decline. We've read the Government of Quebec documents on decline, and we were building up inventories to head it off. Unfortunately, with the caribou being so mobile and so spread out, we don't have the data we need. And the latest data we have come from 2020. So we'll need further data. Do you believe it is reasonable that the Quebec government still has no plan to protect caribou in your region, which, as you noted, are in decline? According to Canadian and Quebecois data, it is inconceivable that the Quebec government is not sitting down with the federal government to come to a solution? Same question, because Mr. Deschênes, I'm sure you also have some thoughts about what I've just asked. Do you believe that the Quebec government ought to come up with a plan? What I'm calling for now is for since 2005, measures have been put in place. There are territories we cannot access because the caribou are protected there. Measures have been put in place. We are now calling for the federal government and the provincial government to sit down so that the provincial government can explain what they've done, what went well, what went less well, and what there is less to do. We need more dialogue is what we need. Now I have a question for Chief Dufour. In your presentation, you came up with something that you mentioned something that I very much agree with, the need for balance between protecting the caribou and regional biodiversity and jobs. Can you say a little bit more about how we can strike the right balance and protect our forests? So that there may be economic opportunities in the forestry sector. Our community is one of the most impacted ones in Quebec by forestry. Logging has existed in our region for a long time. Some areas have been harvested 3 or 4 times. This makes it difficult to reintroduce a large caribou herd. We do have caribou in our territory. There's roughly, in our Nitassinan, 3 areas of natural forest. As I noted earlier, for solutions to be put in place, Quebec needs to come to the table because Quebec holds data that will be essential if we are to come to get a real snapshot of what's going on in our territory. The federal government will need to be at the table as well. The same is the case for industry and, of course, First Nations. Again, I will repeat, as I have been saying, the Quebec government must take part in negotiations, and I would ask them to do so in a way that respects us. Thank you. How much time do I have left? Okay, perfect. I will go on by circling back to Mr. Baillargeon. I would like to give you the opportunity to propose some solutions that will allow us to protect caribou while at the same time ensuring economic vitality in your region. I'll let you go say a few words about that. Everyone needs to participate in solutions. If the Quebec government, the federal government, and industry and Indigenous communities all sit down to find solutions instead of squabbling with one another, I think we will come to the right solutions. We know that we can protect our economy. We know that we can protect caribou species, but without everyone around the same table, it will not be possible. Thank you, Ms. Fortier. We will now move on to the Bloc Québécois. Mr. Brunel Duceppe will be asking the first questions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses here today for this important study. Mr. Baillargeon, you mentioned that there could be unprecedented and catastrophic impacts on forestry communities in your region. We've heard a lot about Sacré-Cœur, and they actually appeared before us. Can you give other examples of forestry communities that would be impacted by Mr. Guilbeault's order? Basically, all of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, Manicouagan, and La Haute-Côte-Nord would be impacted. As I noted, you cannot remove one link of a chain without the whole chain falling apart, so all communities will be impacted. We have 65 municipalities in our region. 35 depend on the forestry industry. If one falls, a second will, and so will a third, and so on. A domino effect will be set off. The woodland 74% of the woodland caribou range is above the tree line, almost 3/4 of its range. This species is already in decline. So is it really the forestry industry that is endangering it? I think that's a question worth considering. Mr. Bajon, if you could explain to people who are unaware of what's going on in the forestry industry, when you talk about links in a chain, not everyone knows that, say, wood shavings produced by one mill will be used in another factory. Can you talk a little bit about this? So Boisseco produces wood shavings. If Boisseco is forced to shut down, other industries won't have access to their raw materials. Here we can talk about bioeconomies and tertiary processing. If one mill shuts down, another mill will lose supply, and so on and so forth. That's why the forestry industry can be thought of as a chain. Everyone is interconnected. All communities are connected to one another. I will now yield the rest of my time to Mr. Simard. Thank you, Mr. Baillargeon. You have given a good explanation of the domino effect that would be set off in the forestry sector if one link of the chain is removed. When you remove one link in a chain, the whole chain falls to pieces. Yesterday, there were protests in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, and the protesters spoke about the thorny problem of caribou, but also the thorny problem of tariffs. The forestry sector is going through a very difficult time at this moment. Could you say a little bit more about the situation? Yes, there's a number of circumstances, some under Quebec control, some under federal control. We all know about the American tax on lumber. It's up to almost 15%. This is money that is held up at borders that our industry has lost. It makes it difficult to innovate and reinvest in our businesses. Then there's the price of fibers. This drives up prices in the Quebec forestry sector. There are difficult market circumstances at this time. And then the threat of this order. Well, we're at the edge of an abyss here. We can barely keep our heads above water.
Vous avez souligné tout à l'heure.
Earlier, you spoke about the specific case of Saskatchewan, which has a disturbance rate of 60%. To your knowledge, are there scientific data that prove that in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, a disturbance rate under 35% is necessary if we are to save the caribou? Before applying its order, should the government look into gathering further scientific data? And should it carry out a study looking at the Saskatchewan solution and its viability in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean and the Côte-Nord? In recent years, this is what we have been calling on. We have asked for Minister Guilbeault to consider this. We have not gotten a response. What we want to look at is how to apply the Saskatchewan measures in Quebec, because it could benefit our forestry sector. If it worked in Saskatchewan with a higher disturbance rate, how come we cannot? How come we need a 35% disturbance rate in our area? But our requests for more work, more looking into this, have gone unanswered. I will let my colleague ask the final question. Mr. Baillargeon, some people say that forestry, if forestry sector facilities get shut down, the sector will be able to adapt. I come from a forestry region myself. And I was, in fact, a forestry worker. I worked at the Alma pulp and paper plant. So I'll ask you the question. Do you believe the forestry industry is truly able to adapt like that? A very quick response. Yes or no, please. Look at Val Jalbert. Everyone knows about that case. The mill shut down, and now it's a ghost town. Okay, Mr. Boularice will close off the first turn, or the first round, rather. Over to you, Mr. Boularice. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here today for this vital study. I believe we all share the same concerns: how to protect well-paying jobs, how to protect regional vitality in the villages. At the same time, woodland caribou are facing a real threat. This is a fact that is well documented. We've been talking about strategies for years, and we should all feel a sense of urgency. The caribou are not at this table, so we need to feel some urgency on their behalf. I appreciated Chief Dufour's remarks about the right balance between protecting caribou species and ensuring economic development. Chief Dufour, I have read remarks from biologists stating that the health of caribou species can be used to assess the health of a forest. Can you talk about the sort of representativity? If the caribou are going well, a forest is going well. And what would happen if the caribou were to be wiped out?
Excusez, on avait déjà...
We had discussed this internally, and we heard from scientists. What we could ask, I think, is for a study on the health of our boreal forest. Because there's not just the caribou, there are other species that migrate, yes, that live in mature forests like caribou. But I'd like to know the health of our forest, not just caribou, the health of the boreal forest. Scientists called for this. I don't remember who it was, excuse me. But it would be important eventually to have something tangible, cooperation among different departments, ministries, to find out how far can we go to preserve our jobs, because here we talk about our ancestors and our children. Everything we do in Isipit is to maintain a quality of life for our elders and to give to our children. I want my child to be able to work in forestry one day, but also to be able to hunt a caribou. That's what I wish for. That's the ideal. Is that possible? I'm not the one to decide that. We really need to know. We need to have more vision, look further ahead. And I think there are intelligent people in Canada, in Quebec, and in our First Nations who can do this work. I agree with you, Chief Dufour. But to inform us a little bit more, what is the difference, according to you, for caribou between an old forest, a mature forest, and a young forest, a forest that was just reforested? What is the impact on the species? I'll ask Michael to answer that question. He's a biologist here and the Director of Development and Territory. Thank you, Chief. So yes, the first message I would have today is that we've heard a lot at First Nations, from First Nations and industry, but not scientists. There are well-known scientists in Quebec who could certainly talk even more about this than I can. I'm a biologist, but a younger forest opening up the land brings in predators for caribou, including wolves and bear, which have an impact on caribou survival because they're easier to reach. Opening up the land, a younger forest brings in moose and predators, a wolf would attack a moose or a caribou. So that would be the biological answer, but scientists could tell you even more than I could on this.
Okay, merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross. I'd have something to add. Go ahead. I know you have a parliamentary committee, the one here today, and I think what Michael has said, we haven't heard from many scientists. I haven't looked at everything, but it would have been good to have scientists, well-known scientists, who are neutral, who are looking for a balance in all of this. They could have appeared as witnesses, so that's a suggestion. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Chief Dufour, quickly, as you also are stakeholders in companies in the forestry industry with people you know well, who are also online around the table, but you own the same company, but you have different conclusions. For someone from the outside like me, that's a bit concerning. Well, we've always said we've never been against economic development. We engage in economic development, and we will continue to do so. When we say we want a balance between the two, that's it. Great. We understand. Thank you. You're looking for a happy medium. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Second round with Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our committee, your parliamentary committee on the Radical Liberal Order on Woodland Caribou. Chief Dufour, you are currently on the land of your nation, and I can see behind you that you're at your office, and behind you, you have the flag of the nation. And without wanting to interpret anything, am I correct in saying that the caribou is on the flag? Our animal is a moose, Mr. Deltel. Okay, because I could see that behind you. You talked about scientists. Mr. Ross talked about predators. At the beginning of the week here at the Parliamentary Committee, there are witnesses who reminded us of what happened about 15 years ago in British Columbia. There was about the same situation, and there was an authorization for hunting predators, in this case, wolves. And we asked questions about this, and Chief Picard from the Assembly of First Nations, somebody you would know well, said he was open to that proposal. You, as Innu, and as Mr. Boudris said, you're involved in the ecosystem and the economic system. Do you think that allowing a hunt for predators like wolves could have a concrete impact? Because in the case of British Columbia, this is what's important. In 2 years, the herd went up by over 52%. What do you think? Just to mention, we've done 2 expeditions last year, I believe, for hunting wolves. We have a number of trappers on our Nitassinan who trap this animal. For years, we've been addressing predators, wolves. So yes, we are doing that. Perhaps, yes, go ahead, Mr. Ross. If I may, looking at predators is a short-term solution. So if there's no habitat restoration, the day we stop, well, there will be a continuation in the decline of caribou. It's a solution, but it's a short-term solution that needs to go with habitat. So it shows there's no magic solution. Every solution has challenges, but there are solutions to look at. And this one, on your land, it can be productive, and we can look at what happened 15 years ago in BC. The herd went up significantly. This is something that maybe should be looked at even more. That was more of a comment, but to summarize. So, Mr. Deschênes, Granilco, earlier you talked about the fact that what you're doing now is good for the environment because it's a solution for the coal that's used too often, sometimes in Europe. Can you tell me more about how your industry, which takes raw materials, can be very positive for the environment? Yes, Mr. Deltel, that's a great comment. You're quite right. In the work we've done when we wanted to invest, and it was $18.5 million, we turned towards bulk, but we looked at what was happening in Europe and trying to become more green. That's been happening for a number of years. So we wanted to contribute at Granilco. So we turned towards that type of client. So we replaced coal with wood pellets. And this is a long-term contract, and it has a good environmental footprint. And we wanted to show, by investing that amount, that we were becoming greener. And we had we'd like to say, a good conclusion for our investment. And if, unfortunately, the Liberal order went ahead, was implemented by the government, that would have a negative impact on the environment. You're quite right. Your partners or your clients in Europe, are they talking about this? You are creating and selling, and this is generating the wealth we all need in Canada, especially in the regions. Are clients starting to talk about this? Does this have a direct impact on your orders? Very briefly, please. Yes, our clients are talking about it, and on websites for our clients, they are calling for this direction, heading in a greener direction, and they're looking for fiber suppliers to meet certifications. As I said in my opening remarks, for very demanding certifications. Thank you. Madame Châtel, you have the floor.
Je vais passer mon tour à mon collègue Peter Shifke.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Madame Châtel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Chief Dufour, I'll begin with you. You said
to suspend caribou harvesting in order to preserve the species, sacrificing a traditional activity that is central to our culture. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler un peu de l'importance?
Can you talk about the importance of this activity for your community and why you're at that point? Yes. Well, we arrived at that point. It's like with salmon currently. We also stopped when there's a significant decline in land like ours. So it was easy for us to say we needed to stop the hunt because we were going against our own principles. What's nice is that we were able, with the whole Innu Nation, we have an agreement with the Cree that allows us to go to Cree land to harvest animals there, so we can keep that connection that we had lost in Isipit. It has to be said, the connection in Isipit with everything that happened. Caribou moved, and so the connection had almost disappeared with our First Nation. So that agreement allowed us to find that connection again. And I thank our Cree brothers who allow that. These are community hunts. And all Innu First Nations can have X number of caribou. Last year with the forest fires that happened over there, we had to reduce the number of caribou harvested. But this allows us to reintroduce not the ancestral, but the iconic status that animal had for us. So over time, we're reintroducing caribou with this agreement in our community, but it hasn't disappeared in our Nitassinan. There are very few animals, so we've never really hunted them on our Nitassinan. Thank you, Chief Dufour. Mr. Ross, as a biologist, can you talk about the importance and the connection between the health of the caribou population and the health of our forests? Can one exist without the other? That's a good question. My answer to that would be that caribou is an umbrella species. So we talk a lot about caribou today. But to us, protecting caribou means protecting other species. There are other species at risk in Nitassinan, types of birds, for example, and they are often linked to the same type of forest as caribou. And there are other species that we aren't even aware of at this stage. So the forests on our land are very important for biodiversity. So investing in protecting caribou is really investing in protecting our forests. The forest and the forestry industry. Is that true? Well, certainly protecting biodiversity on our land from a cultural point of view, certainly. Thank you. Pierre-Olivier Boudreau, a biologist and a director of conservation for Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, who will be joining us on the next panel, said in an interview that the province of Quebec has pushed back its strategy 4 times since 2018. The federal government has given a number of warnings, gave additional time last year because of forest fires. The federal government has been pretty patient. Do you agree with what Pierre-Olivier Boudreau said, Mr. Chief Dufour? Well, it's been 8 years that we've been actively working, and the government of Quebec was supposed to work on a caribou strategy. So yes, it's been pushed back. I wasn't sure. I don't know if I'm mistaken, but I thought Minister Guilbeault reached an agreement last year to give an additional year to Quebec, that had an agreement between Quebec and the federal government. I didn't think it was because of forest fires, but it might be. Quebec needs to be present. It has important expertise that was developed at the Ministry of the Environment. Thank you. We need to balance the environment and forestry, so the 2 ministries should be there. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Dufour. Now, Mr. Simard, I think. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Dufour, in your opening remarks, you talked about a type of collaboration that should be happening nation to nation between Quebec, the Canadian government, and First Nations. Perhaps we could add some companies to that. I want to talk about that because I know that the issue of caribou is difficult to resolve. How can we find a compromise between protecting the species and the interests of the forestry industry? There won't be any magic solution. But I think that by respecting each nation, it might be wise, and I'd like to hear your perspective, it might be wise to say that the order should be paused and that there should be time for collaboration between First Nations, the Government of Quebec, industry, and the Government of Canada. Since you opened that door, would you agree with that? And before I conclude, I'd have the same question for Mr. Baillargeon. Would he agree with coordination before the order is drafted so solutions could be found? So, from what I've understood, the federal government, with the act, has no choice but to act. In issuing an order, could there be coordination? I think so. It could be included before even taking action. So you have a decision in favor from the Court of Quebec. We've had 45 years of negotiations for a modern treaty. We've always focused our actions on negotiating. Other First Nations have used the courts. I said earlier that we used them because we had no choice but to protect our gains. These are gains that have taken 45 years, and we had an obligation to do so. What I'm saying is that we've always been pro-negotiating for any issue. Before going to Mr. Bayarjon, I'm sorry, but you're out of time. Mr. Bayarjon, his name was mispronounced, so perhaps he could answer. I've been told it's Bayargon. And in any case, no, he can answer it, the member. So, Mr. Boudris. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Ross. There are issues with predators and roads that make it easier to access caribou by wolves. Earlier, you talked about the need to reestablish habitat. So what would you suggest as solutions to reestablish habitat for a better protection and for the survival of woodland caribou? What does that mean concretely? So yes, once again, it would be good to have caribou specialists to answer these questions, but based on my knowledge, the community in 2016, the community closed roads that led to no cottage or anything, so secondary roads that had nothing at the end of them. Certainly that's one thing, that's the first thing to do. And then to think about forestry management in a way that minimizes the impact on the species. So it's possible to do things differently in the future and to find ways to recover things and close roads. That's one option.
Chef Dufour, vous avez dit...
Thank you. Chief Dufour, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that the order would only target 3.7% of your territory. That caught me a little bit off guard. Do you think it's that number is too small? It's just the reality. That's how the order is written. The remainder of the order touches the neighboring community. You may want to reach out to them. They're having elections right now, but they would be well placed to respond to your questions about what is happening on their territory. But yes, 3% affects our Nitasanan. We don't have a lot of caribou habitats or habitats that are conducive to caribou. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Mr. Bayarjon. You spoke very convincingly about the importance of protecting both the economy and caribou populations. What, for people who, as an association that wants to protect the caribou and the economy, what would be the first step of a possible solution that would strike the balance that everyone wants? That is, economic development on one hand and preserving caribou populations on the other. More cooperation. Cooperation between all stakeholders, industry, indigenous stakeholders, federal, provincial, municipal stakeholders. That is the only way to protect caribou species. Quebec has had a caribou plan since 2005. Sectors of land have already been removed from the possibility of forestry to protect caribou, so we can continue along that path. If we want to collaborate, we need to have a mutual understanding of the facts and what has already been done. For example, what you mentioned the Quebec government doing. The issue of predation also came up. About 15 years ago in BC, it was permitted to hunt for predators. This had a beneficial effect on local populations. Could this be part of the solution in Quebec as well? Certainly, it's a tool in the toolbox, but climate change must also be taken into account. In discussions surrounding this issue, we do not mention climate change enough. The effect of climate change on caribou populations, well, it has a massive effect. Climate change affects not just the forestry. It's not just the forestry sector harming caribou. It's where predators live, wolves, bears, and that is affected by climate change. It needs to be part of any solution. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I only had 2 minutes. I'm pleased to learn I have more time. Mr. Deschênes, I would like to turn to you now, because your business is going through the real effects of what is being proposed, and you're taking part in the green economy. You're taking what would have been thrown out and using it to replace coal. In your industry, but also in the regional forestry industry, but also the global forestry industry, could anything be done to convince people that the forestry can be good for the environment? I would agree with you. Forestry is good for the environment. There's a lot of negative messaging circulating. People like to pick on the forestry sector. But harvesting trees is like harvesting fruit from a garden. We have environmental certifications. We are monitored heavily. We have a sustainable development policy at Boisacco. We promote a green economy, and we do our best to ensure concrete measures are done to promote the environment in Quebec and throughout the country. With my final seconds, I will say we are all looking for the same thing. We want to strike a balance between protecting the environment and protecting the economy. I think we can do it. We've been able to do it before, and we can continue along that path. We can preserve both the caribou populations and our jobs in our regions. We have heard what you are saying. We have heard the solutions you are proposing. We have heard your realities. We are, unfortunately, are not moving towards the right solutions, and we need a more positive approach. Instead of denigrating the forestry industry, we should be proud of our forestry workers. All right, we will end off with Ms. Fortier. You could just call me Mona. Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to be able to ask some more questions. I think this conversation is fascinating because many people have proposed productive solutions. I also think it's nice to hear that the Conservatives now want to reduce carbon emissions. It's great to learn that we're finally on the same page. We need a functional economy and a functional environment, as well as a vital rural sector. Mr. Deschênes, can you talk a little bit about how things work internally at your company? You've spoken about putting measures in place to protect the environment and to protect caribou habitats, if I understood you correctly. What are these measures? Do you carry out research? Do you have a team that proposes environmentally sound approaches? Can you talk a little bit about your internal measures? Great question. We adhere to very strict European certifications, and we are required to prove that we are balancing economy and environment. We self-audit ourselves every single year. These certifications are very strict. People come from abroad to inspect our operations. They go into the forest to get a sense of what is going on the ground and to verify that protections have been put in place. At Granulco, our job is to respect the stringent European norms. I get the impression that when audits are carried out, they lead to recommendations that you put in place. Can you confirm this? Can you give some examples of, say, recommendations that have been followed up on in the last 5 years? Often, audits pick up on issues, on instances of non-compliance, minor ones or major ones, but we're not always perfect because we work in a complex industry. As for concrete measures, I would like to turn to my colleague. Honestly, we're not specialists. We go down a checklist. We have specialized teams that would be in charge of this, and it would be better that they speak to you. But what I'm asking is that when audits are carried out and it leads to recommendations, I'm sure that you have scientists and experts within your business who are able to take the recommendations and implement them to bring you in line with the standards that govern your industry. Oh, certainly. We work with external firms that have great technical expertise. They work with us all year long. And we have teams in charge of certification with specialized knowledge. Do you work with other businesses within your sector? You did suggest that everyone should be around the same table. With this in mind, do you have any alliances where different companies work together to propose solutions? All Quebec wood pellet manufacturers are under a single umbrella. We get together, we talk about certifications, best practices, issues. So certainly, there are industry associations in Quebec where we share our knowledge. It's good to know that there are other key players all working on solutions. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have? 30 seconds? Well, in that case, I will thank you once more. I would also like to thank our panelists who shared their lived experiences with us. I, too, would like to thank our witnesses and, of course, committee members who asked very good questions. We will now suspend briefly to set up the second panel. Once again, to our witnesses, thank you for being with us today. The forestry industry has modernized. We have optimized our work, and we use 100% of the tree. I'm sorry, we need to stop you there to go over to Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thank you, Chair. I think it's actually me. Oh, sure. In that case, over to you, Ms. Chattel. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. I'm following these discussions with great interest, and a consensus is emerging. First, all forestry stakeholders would agree that there is no economy without the environment. For an economy to flourish, the environment must be protected. And if the caribou were to go extinct, that would be a sign that the forest itself is unhealthy. In my region, there's a thriving forestry industry. And I've witnessed it evolving. Forestry has taken on sustainable development practices over the years as at the behest of consumers. Consumers want more sustainable practices, and the forestry industry has adapted. At the same time, it is government's responsibility to protect the environment, not just for us and for today's jobs, but as the chief. I heard earlier the chief saying, I want my children to be able to work in the forestry sector. So it is the responsibility of governments to set out clear objectives. When we talk about the decline of caribou populations, we are also talking about the decline of the forest as a whole, and with it, the forestry industry over the long term. That is why it is so important for everyone to work together, and I believe there is a consensus around that. There is also a consensus that we need to find solutions. if Quebec puts in place the appropriate measure to protect our forests, caribou habitats, and the future, we will not need the emergency order. I would first like to hear from Mr. Branchot. How long have you been calling on the Quebec government to do more to protect caribou? Since 2016, when the plan came out. And the idea of a caribou strategy was proposed, CPWS has been participating in all public meetings and all consultations in order to lend a hand to the government's efforts. We work with with industry as well, like the Chibougamau site. We work with them to put in place alternative measures to protect caribou and jobs. We work in good faith. For more than 3 years now, we have been calling on the federal government to put in place targeted measures to protect caribou populations that are on the brink. I would describe what the Quebec government is doing as procrastination. It's not that they've done nothing at all. But as of today, August 30th, 2024, there is no measure has been put in place. We're still at the consultation stage. What is more, the Quebec government has not set out a clear timeline. As I noted in my opening remarks, Quebec's proposed plan has great potential, but they keep kicking the can down the road. We are working in a context where someone needs to take charge and stand up and protect caribou habitats. Those are the habitats being targeted by the emergency order. This is in order to ensure the survival of the species. Ms. Lavoie, would you agree that what the forestry sector needs is certainty? Everyone needs to know where we are going. I entirely agree with that, Ms. Châtel. Mr. Branchot said that he took part in various processes in good faith. The same can be said for our industry. We have had operational groups set up, independent committees. We raised our hand and agreed to act. Everyone is on the same wavelength here. We want there to be true cooperation. Not just a strategy that we can comment on, a strategy that we can implement in collaboration with our partners, environmental groups, First Nations, governments. We don't need to go about things through orders. I entirely agree with you. Ms. Simard, are you witnessing solutions being put in place? Of course, we want to protect the economy of today, but we also want to ensure an economy for our young people. They too will want to work in the forestry industry one day. We also want to protect biodiversity and caribou populations. If caribou go extinct, well, we also live in an environment. If one species vanishes, we might be next. So, what solutions can be put in place to protect the jobs of today and tomorrow, as well as our environment and our economy? To speak about Charlevoix specifically, we stand in solidarity with Ms. Lavoie and her team. The federal order is proposing something is targeting a different territory than what the Quebec government is focusing on. The Quebec government pilot project is more or less the same as what was studied by the Independent Caribou Commission. Oh, I'm sorry. You can always write to me, Ms. Certainly, you can follow up with written comments. I'm sorry to have cut you off there. I had no choice in the matter. We will now go to Mr. Simard. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Lavoie. We have spoken in our committee. We talked about domino chains that could devastate the forestry sector. And we also talked about talked about cumulative effects because the forestry sector is going through some tough times. In your opening remarks, you mentioned that you would lose 1/3 of the territory you access in Charlevoix. Could you speak a little bit about the impact that this will have on your company's planning processes? Just to specify, that 1/3 would include not just Charlevoix, but also Pipmoacan. As for the impact, we would no longer be able to go on with 1/3 of the territory missing. We already lost 3,000 hectares. And with it, a great deal of planning for future factories. Then there was the 2019 moratorium. The order would make us lose 3,000 more hectares from our region. And then there's the efforts to protect the local turtle populations in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. It all adds up. There's basically things are being stacked up on our shoulders. Often we talk about the need for predictability in the forestry sector. Well, our predictability is being blown up by this order. We are no longer certain in our ability to supply ourselves. Got it. And I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but what you're saying is the order is one threat among many others that are facing the forestry sector. Eastern spruce budworm, all that. There's already great unpredictability in the sector, and now you don't even know about fiber availability over the next 4 years. This is very difficult for any forestry business wishing to invest. Oh, certainly. Everything's been paralyzed. We have ambitious plans and synergies in the works at our cooperative. For example, obtaining new logging, drying, and sawmill materials. But we don't know what will happen from one day to another. I've heard discussions about alternative solutions, unharvested wood, private forests, but we have already taken these into account. Great efforts have already been put in place to ensure supply for our factories. But all of these alternative solutions just won't make up for that loss. People are calling for auctions. Well, that would just put us in competition with much larger sawmills. We would be drowned out. Our industry is in a very vulnerable state. And vulnerable businesses can't get loans. Thank you. Very quickly, how many people are there in... how many individual caribou exist in the Charlevoix region? 31 individuals in the herd. All right. Mr. Vachon, I don't know if you have any information about... Oh, Branchot, sorry. I'm sorry for giving you a brand new last name. Would you happen to have any information on how many individuals are needed in order to sustain a herd? You're on mute, sir. It varies from one population to another and from one ecosystem to another. As for the Charlevoix herd, I don't recall what the recovery target was, but we should be able to reach something like 200 individuals in order, if we want to have a high probability of survival, if we are to avoid issues of consanguinity, for example. For this to happen, the habitat must be protected. And that just about answers your question. You only have 15 seconds. 15 seconds. I find that number interesting, 200. I don't know what that's based on, but I imagine there's scientific research that could tell us more about the number of individuals that is needed to maintain a herd. If you could provide this research to the committee, we would be very grateful. With pleasure. And again, this is a nuanced situation. Mr. Boulariz, over to you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses who have come to provide us with their expertise and know-how in the context of this very important study. Ms. Simard, earlier, Mr. Blanchot talked about procrastination by the Quebec government. You, on your end, spoke about inaction and incompetence in the management of a species which is on the brink. If we continue delaying action, what will be the impact? We won't meet our objectives. We won't be able to fulfill our legal obligation to protect threatened species, endangered species. Both the governments of both Quebec and Canada have this legal obligation. And just to follow up on what I said earlier, in Charlevoix in particular, there are possible solutions. We don't want to stack up problems for the forestry sector like Ms. Laveau has talked about. We could, for example, look at Quebec's proposed solution, which already enjoys consensus in the region and was approved by local commissions. Under this plan, all of the various proposed solutions which are creating so much anxiety could be overlooked in favor of better solutions. Researchers are telling us that we need to act now. Otherwise, we can miss our objectives entirely. The Quebec government has had ample time to act. Even in 2022, they released a joint press statement stating the Quebec government's willingness to protect all caribou herds in the province. Unfortunately, this announcement didn't lead to anything. So now is the time to act.
I'm pleased to hear that. The NDP is very concerned about protecting jobs, but also the energy transition, a just transition for workers, having a place for workers around the table during discussions. Charlie Angus, my colleague from Northern Ontario in the NDP, worked on a law for sustainable jobs. So what you're saying, Madame Simard, is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The independent commission has already done some of the work, and different levels of government, different stakeholders should return to that document and take inspiration from it for measures to take. Exactly. Many witnesses talked about consultation being necessary. All of that work has already been done. Consultation has already been done. It was an independent commission led by experts who went all over Quebec for nearly a year, who analyzed many documents, met with scientists, met with industry, Indigenous communities, and prepared recommendations. A long report that provides an action plan. And when that came out, Nature Québec said, here's the strategy the government of Quebec should use. This commission that was struck created a perfect strategy to implement. We have that document. We know what to do. We just need to do it.
Merci,
Thank you, Madame Simard. Mr. Blanchot, a little earlier, we've talked in recent weeks of thresholds for this species, for woodland caribou. I'd like you to inform the committee of what it means exactly so that everybody can properly understand what these disturbance thresholds are. So as a plan is being prepared, the federal government created a study in 2011 and brought together the best experts on caribou to determine the connection between the disturbance rate and the probability of survival of a population of caribou. So scientists determined that at 35%, in terms of the disturbance rate, the survival probability is 70% for a herd, which isn't much. As the disturbance rate goes up, the mathematical model shows that the survival probability of a herd goes down enormously when the disturbance rate is under 35%. Survival rates are much higher. So it's a mathematical model that was built by scientists with all of the data that were generated on caribou populations throughout Canada. And so that's what led to those conclusions. Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left? 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay, Mr. Branchot, regarding disturbance for woodland caribou, Mr. Ross in the previous panel told us that to have a recovery of the species, a recovery of habitat for the species, we'd need measures for roads that disturb caribou, but that are also nearly highways for predators. Do you agree with him on that? Absolutely. If we take the example of Charlevoix, the disturbance rate is about 90%. In the measures proposed by the Government of Quebec, restoration needs to be done. There's a budget for that, a significant budget to do that work when a caribou strategy is adopted. So yes, habitat needs to be restored. It needs to be preserved. And I think an important message, I've heard a lot of denial of science at the beginning of the day. And we're acting like it was done with climate change. We need to change. Thank you. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je suis désolé, mon français.
I'm sorry, my French is not very good yet.
In English, and I'd like to echo some of the concerns we've heard here regarding a lack of science. And I'd start by having the minister and officials' failure to appear before this committee to explain the entirety of the logic behind this job-killing decree that they have issued. And when witnesses come here from industry and say that we are going to have to go out of business or curtail our employment, I believe them. And I don't think the government should be so arrogant to say that we don't believe you and put at risk our entire communities.